The Absolute Universe has gods now, and as always, Absolute Martian Manhunter is this perfect blend between metaphor and realism, because what this does is this initially opens up, right? The ending of this first arc, this initially opens up with John and his wife Bridget getting ready to have this gigantic fight. Now, of course, that fight's been a long time coming, if you guys been reading Martian Manhunter or following Absolute Martian Manhunter on the channel, because John is very much just kind of dismissive of his wife, her wants, her needs, and largely focusing on his own thing, which is going to piss anybody off. And he kind of avoids the fight, right? He's like, I've got to go get down to a crime scene. This thing happened. We'll pick this up later, which of course leaves her steaming and leaves her pissed off. But the kicker behind this is that that's not the only reason why she's mad. That as it stands right now, because of the actions of the White Martian, which historically speaking is the antithesis of Martian Manhunter and basically his arch nemesis within the main DC universe, that here, both Martian Manhunter and the White Martian are far more powerful than they traditionally are in DC Comics. And that what's been happening is that because of the White Martian, the sun has been shining nonstop for 13 days. Even in the shadows, the temperature reaches 103 degrees. And as you guys know, you put a handful of people in a room and you turn the temperature up, tempers are going to start flaring. It's just the nature of people, right? Folks get angry when they get hot. And so what's wild about this is that as time goes on, right, as more and more time passes, that you have these instances where the city starts to descend into madness. Middleton itself. In fact, John Jones says, most in Middleton are either an immigrant or the child of one. Over 130 languages are spoken fluently here. Visions like fields of wildflowers, endless blooming points of view. There are communities from places most Americans have never even heard of, people without countries to go back to. But a second chance takes work. I never saw before now, never understood how much work. Second chances mean living with centuries-old cultural enemies. Second chances mean finding a way to hold on to your language, traditions, and values while adapting to others. For the most part, they make it work, which I can now see as a kind of miracle, and also the most natural thing in the world. And he says, for the most part, on Happy Heart Lane, some people are literally steaming mad. The steam screams in high-pitched outrage. It whistles curses and promises violence and degradation. It signals serious intent. In the bone-white light, which no one else seems to notice, prejudices people worked hard to put away suddenly flare back to vivid life. On day 12 of the heat wave, the thin strip of grass between 961 and 963 Coolidge Road is a war zone. Matt Galvers and Calvin Hill have been neighbors for 20 years. They'd watched each other's kids grow up together, shared a love of craft beers and cars they could never afford. But a long-standing argument over the property line had suddenly exploded into all-out war. These guys are literally donning like military garb, right? And the way that it's depicted here, right? It almost kind of looks like this Vietnam-era battle scene, right? They've got these kind of makeshift walls up. They've got barbed wire, all that kind of stuff. It looks like a war zone. Now, again, how much of this is literal and how much of this is metaphor is up to interpretation, because one of the things that we'll see as we get further into this is that as crazy as some of this stuff looks, it may very well be real, but the real meat and potatoes here, right? What is factual about all of this is the heat is driving people crazy, to the point where we're told each side patrols the makeshift wall 24 hours a day in 8-hour shifts. Even the kids are not spared. The Martians had no luck with the sun, so we try to treat the symptoms. It's temporary relief at best. And so they basically start reminding both sides of the things that they've done for each other, how they've helped each other out. They helped them find common ground. They weren't always enemies towards each other. But it's much bigger than this, right? On day 13, there are 13 separate unprovoked police shootings at routine traffic stops, all in one day. The police are red-faced and unrepentant. A million justifications beating on the windows of their own interrogation rooms. The families of the victims are visibly swirling with outrage, revenge fantasies, and carefully planned retaliations. And all the while, Bridget just keeps getting more and more pissed off at John because he's constantly growing more distant, ignoring the fact that she wants to talk to him. It's one of the things that we've talked about before. Bids, right? Your husband or wife or whoever looks out the window says, that's a beautiful bird. That's a bid. They want you to look at the bird and then they want you to talk to them about the bird. Acknowledge the fact that they see the world a certain way. And that's what Bridget is doing. But she's literally wanting to talk to her husband and he's constantly blowing her off. And so things continue on, right? Things get violent quickly in the alley. There was a disagreement as to whether a member of the Lucky Strikes bowling team's toe went over the line. A holy war breaks out between the Church of the Lord Redeemer Jesus Christ and the Church of the Redeemer Lord Jesus Christ. They had only split the year before over baptism. One believed a sprinkle was enough. The other called for full submersion. Even some of the church members cannot remember which is which. So literally people are going to war against each other. And we're not talking about yelling matches. We're talking about physical violence, fighting over nonsensical things. Now that's kind of the metaphor, right? Like people oftentimes create differences between one another in order to have a reason to call somebody else an enemy. Does it make sense? No. But if emotions were logical, they wouldn't be called emotions. They would be called logicals. And that's really what all this is focusing on. In the heat wave, people's irrationality and their emotions are getting the better of them. And logic is being replaced by hate, disdain, violence. And so finally, things start catching up to Bridget and John. When he goes to walk out of the house and she's like, you cannot ignore me forever. And initially he almost kind of gaslights her. And his response is, you're imagining things, I'm not avoiding you. His response is to gaslight the hell out of his wife, right? And she's like, we're supposed to be partners, John. And that's where he says, I mean, we are. And that's where she asks, then where have you been? Because the reality here is when you jump into that kind of a marriage like that, you're signing an agreement, right? You're saying, come what may, you and I are partners. Now, sometimes those partnerships don't work out for any number of reasons. But at the end of the day, the goal is to try to find a way to make it work. And it's not one of these situations where there's irreconcilable differences, right? Bridget wants to have kids and John doesn't, right? They're 99% compatible except for that 1%, which is all the difference in the world. Instead, it is John ignoring his wife. And that is a choice that he is making. It's not some situation thrust upon him. And so that's where she says, you've never been one to show your emotions, and I never needed you to be, because I could look into your eyes and I could see what you were thinking. It was almost like your thoughts were written all over your face. And she says, that's why before now, I never doubted our marriage, never doubted how you felt about me and Tyler. And that catches John by surprise because he didn't know she felt that way. But how could he? He was never giving her a chance to express herself and to talk about how she felt, avoiding her every step of the way. And that totally blows him away because he's like, of course I care about you. Like, of course, you guys are the most important things to me, right? You guys are the reason why I do what I do. And he tells her, right? Like, I'm the same man that I've always been. We are partners. And that's when she flies off at the handle, right? And it's kind of amazing the way this is drawn. I want to point that out, right? She's screaming in a red speech bubble and he's talking in a blue speech bubble, right? Fire versus cold, emotion versus rationality. That kind of seems to be what's going on. It doesn't mean that she is out of line in being emotional. Of course she is. She's pissed off. She has every reason to be mad, right? And she was like, you make us move here without any explanation or consultation, right? And he's like, I mean, I did explain, right? It's the Bureau. And she's like, without even any discussion or notice. One day we just picked up and left. We lived in DC for 6 years, John. All our friends were there. And now none of them will return my calls or texts. I must have texted Sam and Evelyn at least a dozen times, and no one will explain to me why. You won't explain why. And his response, I don't really know, but she can see the look on his face that he's lying, because maybe there was something that went on behind the scenes where he betrayed the trust of her friends, and that's why they fled in the first place. Because the reality is that he was made to leave, because there are things that he's not telling her for why he left in the first place. And so again, it kind of continues on. John says, while Bridget and I fight, the Martian fiddles with the sun, like a combination lock. It's distracting, but it seems like he's almost figuring it out, which ultimately he does, right? The Martian Manhunter figures out a way to, quote unquote, get the sun to set and to end the heat wave, which seems like a very literal thing. But when that happens, because the sun is now set and because the heat wave is officially over, as that takes place, 3 guys head to these locations over in Middleton, right? The Middleton nuclear power plant, Middleton coal, and Middleton gas, and they blow up all three places. They destroy them all, and it takes down power to the entirety of Middleton in the middle of the night. So quite literally, there's a blackout at night, and that's when things go haywire, because the Martian Manhunter says that was the goal. That was the goal of the White Martian, right? The sun was a distraction. Darkness was White Martian's true intent. And this is where things get nuts, because in that moment, there's this guy, right, in a clown jacket that walks up on this dog and unfortunately takes out the dog, which we can all blame Dennis Camp for doing such a heinous thing. You never kill the dog, Dennis Camp. I don't know why you would do that. But again, it kind of picks up with Martian Manhunter and John as they're investigating all of this. And it's not the first time something like this is happening. And in fact, this is one of the coolest things. And so what he says here is, beneath conscious thought, a charcoal sketch of our perversions, urges, secrets, and pain, our shadow selves, the ones we stuff down and step on and ignore. Well, I guess they've had enough, because the shadows are rising up. Now that is metaphorical, but he's basically talking about people becoming the darkest versions of themselves. He says a coordinated attack on Middleton power stations has left the city in total darkness, and it's hard to say how long it's been. The sun has yet to rise, but I feel certain that weeks have passed. Now, one of the comments of the Martian Manhunter here is very important. He says, great darkness, cosmic darkness, old darkness, darkness before time, before creation, soon will spread, the final night. Now that is an incredibly important statement here, and you guys will see what I'm talking about, right, as we get into it, because it's bonkers, right? But kind of picking back up with John, he says it's one of those nights that seem to go on forever. Everybody knows instinctively that morning will never come. And he says most people hide in the safety of their lightless living rooms. They look out from behind blinds and jump at shadows. And who can blame them? The streets are far from empty despite the hour. Lootings are common in blackouts, but these are different. Two-person teams of teens and their two-dimensional doubles carry TVs, hair dryers, stereos, and other useless electronic equipment through smashed shop windows. The shadows are a negative influence. Wild teens abandoning everything, establishing new ecstatic religions, perfumed with patchouli and night-blooming jasmine. They dance in front of great fires and hold up their useless loot. Each shadow cast becomes a brief object of worship. They give these new gods new names and new stories, pray and sing, improvise hymns, spill blood in their divine new names, until they get bored and throw it all in the fire, object, shadow, god, and name, and start again. Others worship the light. They pursue it violently. Why? What are they after exactly? Do they want to save it or be saved by it? Do they want to destroy or be destroyed? What he's talking about here is kind of the madness of humanity in what's called a state of nature, right? There's all kinds of ideas when it comes to this, right? Political philosophers call it a state of nature, which is society with no ordered government. And some people who misunderstand the concept might call it anarchy. But the general gist here is this. If you follow like Thomas Hobbes, for example, life is short, brutish, and cruel. And this is a very Hobbesian approach. In a state of nature with no ordered government, society will destroy itself. And that's why society forms the Leviathan, a governing body, if for no other reason than self-preservation. And it's not to say that everyone is given into the madness and everyone is insane. In fact, one of the things that John comments on is the nature of Bridget, right? He says, despite the blackout, Bridget refuses to see me. She was never especially scared of the dark, but she should be. We can't see people clearly in this kind of gloom. To be sure of anything, we have to get up close. I know Bridget can take care of herself. That's one of the things, one of the amazing things that I love about her. She could always take care of herself, but I wait by the car while the Martian makes sure anyway. And he says certain grocery stores and restaurants promising open all night find themselves in over their heads. The night shift really grinds you down. Long nights like this can be a killer. And so what you find out is that in one of these restaurants, there is a woman here who's grinding up glass. It's an old prison trick, right, to kill somebody, right? You just grind up glass, put it in their food, and slowly kill them over time. And that's what she's doing here. She's putting glass in hamburger meat and then serving the hamburgers to people. Now, of course, John shows up here, catches her in the middle of the act. She realizes what's going on and she takes off into the alley. But again, he continues on, right? I caught a whiff of the secret ingredient as I walked by. Dumb luck. Razor-sharp stars of rage tear up inside of my nose, but even still I'm tempted. The burgers smell delicious. I walk through the park looking for trouble, but find mostly love and fireflies. Kids play tag with their own shadows. I guess they're on better terms than we are with ours. Maybe our shadow is just another old friend we lose touch with. I realize that even in the moonlight, I cannot tell which is the shadow and which is the real thing. And he says, suddenly, I have a craving for Chacos. Isn't it incredible how good they are at advertising now? Like, they're almost in your head. They've really got it down to a science. Of course, Chacos basically being a kind of cookie, and what you find out is that within this place, someone is injecting Chacos with poison. And in fact, like, Bridget and her kid are there. And initially, Tyler goes to try to grab some, right? And of course, Bridget's like, nope, you don't need that, put it back. So just kind of, saves him from destruction. And that leads to John chasing down this guy who was the one poisoning everybody. But he says, we all have a dark side, but we don't have to give in to it. And he says, we all have a choice, don't we? And that's where the Martian says, very sad, sweet, inventive story partner. And one of the things that they're talking about here is that in this apartment building that they're watching, this dad goes crazy and takes out his whole family and then unalives himself, right? And he says it's too late for any of them, right? We can't save everybody. But in the middle of all that, John is suddenly hit by an ambulance. Now, this is where we get into the importance of all of this, because one of the things to keep in mind is that up until this point, even the Martian Manhunter didn't seem to fully understand what was going on here. And in fact, the Martian Manhunter just kind of appeared in the story all of a sudden, right? And so this is where things get wild. John says, and then I'm swimming through a sea of darkness, or at least the Martian is. And the Martian says, dingy basement of reality, cold, old, endless. And the Martian says, before light, before creation, it was. The White Martian has trapped it, me, us, trapped us all. And he says, after end, post-existence, will be. And so it says the Martian keeps swimming, searching for its center. I think it's trying to understand. Now, of course, while all that's going on, basically it turns out these drivers of the ambulance are just a couple of crazy guys who end up intending to kill John, right? But one of them has a white orb around their head. And that's an important thing because that seems to mean that that person is possessed by the White Martian. But more so than that, the White Martian kind of looks out to its surroundings and it says, obscene dreamer, creations, burning tiger force, cosmic secret origin. And John is kind of seeing all this to a degree as the Martian is seeing it. And John says the nature of the darkness. Bad idea number 0, because the person they witness is Darkseid. Darkseid being the one who, of course, created the absolute universe. And so it seems to be the first time that anyone in the absolute universe is actually beginning to understand what's going on, that this whole thing was created by Darkseid. They're becoming aware of Darkseid. Now, it only seems to be Martian Manhunter and by extension, John, but that's it. But it's the first step in a much larger journey because with knowledge comes awareness. And now they can start telling other people what's truly going on in this place. Because in that moment, when John witnesses Darkseid through Martian Manhunter, he just says, Darkseid is. And Martian says, beginning, end, everything. And that's not the end of the comic, guys, because we still got more. So this is, I told you guys, this comic is so incredible. And so what this does is it kind of switches back to the here and now, right? We sort of leave Darkseid behind. And the Martian Manhunter and John kind of find themselves asking this question. Why do people do the things they do? And the response of the Martian, traumatic quantities of pain, damage, despair. And he says, we are coming apart. Overexposure to fundamental reality results in anti-life spiral. And so he says, focus, John Jones, see Bridget and Tyler, see them alone, see them needing you. And so it's basically the kind of strength that John needs, the second wind, in order to fight off these guys who are trying to kill them. And so Martian says, pull yourself, us, everything together. Focus, concentrate, remember what matters. And initially, John kind of starts to give into this darkness, right? Nothing matters. Nothing is important. This is just the nature of humanity, right? He's giving in to his cynicism and arguably, depending on what kind of metaphor you want to use for the story, his depression. And Martian tries to tell John, right? Focus, concentrate, remember what is real. And this guy says, you know it. Everybody knows that nothing here matters. Isn't that right, Bob? And of course, Bob shows John with this kind of orb on his head. He shows him the killer clown, right? The clown killer who's going after Bridget and Tyler. And so in that moment, John realizes his wife and child are in danger. And sure, she's brandishing a shotgun in the face of a guy who has a knife, but still, the desire to keep his family safe overtakes him, and he manages to fight these guys off, if only momentarily, because in that moment, the Martian Manhunter finally shows back up. He says, let us in, out, through, John. And John just says, I need your help. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that up until this point in time, John had always kept the Martian at bay. He never let the Martian in, intentionally. He never let the Martian into his own mind in that way, never allowed himself to join with it. And so that's why the Martian says, we're in this together, partner. And John says the Martian looks. He simply just looks at the one with the saw, and all electrical activity in his brain immediately stops. And so in essence, it's the Manhunter, and really even John, using what's basically telepathy is really what's being described here. Not only that, the Martian Manhunter uses the guy that has the orb for an head as a teleportation system, because at that point you switch back over to the house of Bridget, because this clown killer tells her, your husband cannot help you. The green guy cannot help you. No one can help you. The sun will never rise, and no one's coming. No one sees, not even God. Isn't that freeing, that we alone in all of human history will not be judged? Though somehow I get the feeling that if he did see, he would approve. And in that moment, John just comes teleporting through this guy's head, which is really crazy, right, to be quite honest. But he just tells his wife, right, get out of here, get to the back room, lock the door, keep Tyler safe. I will deal with this. And the fight between the two starts to get pretty intense. But what's kind of wild about this is that while John is fighting the clown killer in his own house, that you have the Martian Manhunter fighting the White Martian. And that's why you have this statement where it says, somewhere very high up, spiritually high, all burning symbol and meaning, I can feel two Martians fighting over Middleton. For them, things made of pure mind, it can all get a little abstract. A punch is not just a punch up there, it's a metaphor, although that particular metaphor looked like it hurt. And he says, down here, everything's more literal. A punch is just a punch. Violence is just violence. But that's where you get into the God element of this, because what Martian and White Martian start doing is basically using reality warping powers, right? Because what happens is John says, as the man in the clown jacket tries to spill my brain out onto the hardwood, the White Martian reaches across town into the head of a sleeping boy with terminal brain cancer in apartment 3B. The boy dreams the tumor is as big as the city, and so it becomes as big as the city. It pulses and throbs and seems to smile with crooked, unnatural teeth. Its tendrils reach out, destroying everything they touch. In response, the Green Martian pulls out the revolutionary brain cancer cure that the young girl in 4D of that very same building will help develop 20 years from now. And he says next, the White Martian plucks the fear of the atomic bomb from an aging hippie, 1,000 upturned faces as death traces a screaming rainbow across the sky. The Green Martian scrambles to make one small change, tapping into that same hippie's belief in military incompetence, and the bomb is a dud. The war of green and white unfolds the sky into alien geometries and nonsense emotions. With incomprehensible thesis antithesis weapons, living philosophies debate the life and death of worlds. Reality's crumbling infrastructure is collateral damage. Every mind in Middleton becomes a battleground because they're literally pulling on the thoughts and making the thoughts of every person in Middleton a reality. And John says, me, I stay right here and let nothing get by. Things stopped making sense a while ago. And so that's where the Martian reaches out to John. White flag of victory waving, species-wide tragedy ending imminent. Expand, evolve, enhance your view, see all to save all. Basically, if you don't, everything is going to die because I am losing this fight. And he says, all I see are silhouettes tearing themselves apart in the dark. Despite the darkness, I can see the White Martian is connected to and entangled with the chaos in the streets. I can see that we all are. And that's where the Martian says, White Martian farms, expresses, embodiment, anti-life urges. Why do we do the things we do? And John says, why did I push them away when all I wanted was to hold on till my knuckles turned white? Who was I protecting? Them or myself? What was I so afraid of? And that's where, in this moment, when just all these servants of the White Martian come pouring onto John with the intention of killing him, that Bridget blows the head off of one of them with the business end of a shotgun. And he's like, why couldn't I just talk to my wife? And she looks at him, right? And he just asks, is Tyler okay? And she's like, yes, he's okay. He's safe. But you are hurt. And his response, you were right, Bridget. You were 100% right. I have been hiding, and I don't want to hide anymore. And so John gives himself over fully to the power of the White Martian. And the White Martian says, yes, finally, at last, right? Like epiphanic breakthrough, partial consciousness expansion achieved, unlocked, initiated. And John is just overtaken by what is basically a kind of cosmic awareness, right? But really, it's just unlocking telepathy on a global level. And he says, suddenly it's clear as day. I see all of Middleton, the people on the streets, at least 3/4 mad, running from their own shadows, fighting fire and loss, seeing senseless violence everywhere they turn, incomprehensible forces clashing on battlefields between their ears, as their beautiful, brightly colored lives spill out from them. And so the Martian tells him, right, show them, let them see each other as we see them, as they see themselves. Upgrade, and where he asks how, he's told upgrade unlocks new ability, knowledge, perceptions. Open their eyes. And so it's very reminiscent of that moment from Silver Surfer Requiem, right? Where the gift that Silver Surfer gives to humanity is a moment of cosmic awareness where they can truly see how they're all connected. And that's what John does. John uses his newfound powers to tell everyone, breathe in the emotions of other people, essentially. And that's what they do. And when that happens, everybody starts experiencing everybody else's past, their loves, their hurts, the things they got right, the things they got wrong, all the things they never said that they wish they had said, and all the things they said that they wish they never said. All these things, these regrets, and the beauty that is human life, because everyone has their own traumas, but everybody also has their own fantastic achievements. And what the White Martian was trying to build on was divisiveness. That person is different than you, and because they're different, they're bad. Whereas the Martian Manhunter, and through John, was making the argument, that person is different from you, and there's something dope that you can learn about them because of that, right? There's a way in which the two of you can connect if you have an open mind and are receptive to the fact that you alone are not the center of the universe, and you're not the most important person in the world, and you never were. And in that moment, with all that coalescing together, it gives the Martian Manhunter the ability to kill and defeat the White Martian. And the day is saved, which is amazing. Now, of course, that leads to the sun finally rising yet again, and that's where things get a little ambiguous, right? Did this all just happen in one night, or was it happening over a series of successive nights? Again, metaphor versus realism, but this story is incredible. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. This is probably one of the greatest comic book stories that I've ever read in my entire life. It was phenomenal. But thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.